Hello, everyone. My name is Ben Kaplan. I'm the CEO of Top Worldwide and PR Hacker, and we have a division of the agency called Top Government that is working on supporting a lot of the types of amazing leaders that are on this call. First of all, I wanted to say a big thank you, number one, to the leadership of Larry through this entire initiative and It's Worth a Shot campaign, and the amazing, really, project management of Kelly, who is like, if you ever need trains running on time, I think you call Kelly up because she's fantastic. So thank you to both of you for that. What I always say is be careful of who you take advice from, but be patient with those who give it. So to your point, Kelly, I'm going to do about 60 seconds just so you know our perspective and you can know who you're getting advice from, and then the rest will be all about empowering you. So I'm going to share my screen here. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through this quickly here, and I want to be able to see all of your faces as well. So I'm going to go into full screen mode. And this is going to be COVID-19 vaccine message and media training. Like I said, very briefly, Top Government, we're a global marketing agency. We do a lot of data-driven thinking. Today, we're going to focus on the communication side, but I'm going to pull some examples from how you do digital spreading of the word, how you can use creative execution to do it, how these factors influence this, but we're going to focus on the kind of PR and the media training side right now. Just a little bit about me and my two other co-presenters. I'm the CEO of Top Government and Top Worldwide. I've been a guest on 5,000 TV and radio shows and been a contributor to CNN, Fox News, CNBC, and many others. And I used to be a syndicated columnist. We have with us Sean Lansing, who's our group director of client strategy, and he's been 13 years at all levels of kind of government and political space, helping candidates, elected officials, issue advocacy organizations. He's fantastic, like jumping on trending news stories. I know he's going to have a lot to add when talking about, kind of the briefing on Johnson & Johnson, the news about that. We'll talk about how that impacts things. He's a great resource. And then third, Jackson Carpenter. He's our director of integrated marketing. He has worked on all sorts of campaigns, but also on a lot of state and local campaigns, including the mayoral campaign for Salt Lake City's first openly LGBTQ plus mayor. So he brings a lot of experience as well at also messaging all sorts of different groups. So that's our team, and here is the agenda for today. First, we're going to talk about vaccine messaging objectives. What are our objectives, and how does that influence how we talk about things? Second, we're going to talk about speaking to target audiences. So who are our key audiences? Who do we have to influence, and how might our messaging change based on we're talking to someone who, to all the stats at the beginning, someone who doesn't think they need the vaccine versus someone who's really worried about all this Johnson & Johnson news. How does that change? Third, we're going to talk about hitting the key points. What are the key points we have to message? How do we stay on message? What are the points that we could almost like not say too much of? What should those be? Fourth, we're going to talk about effective communication tactics. So we're going to talk about how can you communicate something in a way, and we're going to give you a framework. I'll give you a little preview now. That's simple, surprising, and significant, which gives it a message a higher viral velocity. It wants to spread faster. Right? Faster than COVID can spread. So we're going to talk about that. Final 2 points, we're going to talk about how we make our messages stick. How is it sticky? How do people remember things? And then finally, some tactics for different mediums, whether that's TV or radio, or you're doing an interview, or your print interview, or you're talking to a constituent. So if that sounds good, that's the agenda for today. Does that sound good? If you don't mind giving me a quick head nod if you're there. Okay, excellent. Thank you for the thumbs up, Larry. So just to reiterate, everything we're going to talk about messaging today is pulled from the It's Worth a Shot campaign. Kelly kind of talked about some of the resources that are there, and specifically wanted to highlight some of the things from the vaccine talking points for leaders you can see on the screen, media tools, and also social media templates. So everything I'm going to talk about is from there. So if you're like, oh, that was an interesting point, what exactly did he say? You can always go to use these as the resources. So let's talk about what are the top objectives for vaccine messaging. What are some of the things that we need to say? And I'm going to give you 4 key ones. The first is that we have to bridge the vaccine safety information gap. Obviously, lots of questions, and people have different concerns about safety, right? Some people are very concerned, obviously, from themselves. They're in a target age range or demographic group that is at high risk. Some people, though, have concerns not for them. It's for a loved one. It's for someone else. It's for someone they're really worried about. So how does that influence? So the first thing we have to do is bridge the vaccine safety information gap. And I wanted to give you an example of this. And Sean, if you want to kind of kick us off and start this for like a sample, this is from the messaging guide about how to message about vaccine safety.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Ben. I think, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but there's obviously, and hopefully you've seen it in the materials, different ways to approach this, right? It can be giving data points, can be giving anecdotes, it can be giving concrete steps for action. And this one is really kind of that data point, right? So we talk about the fact that on a broad perspective, the COVID-19 vaccine has been proven to be so safe and effective that 3 different vaccines have received authorization to date. Obviously that, changed a little bit this morning, which we'll talk about. But we also talk about that big number, right? That wow, maybe that simple, surprising, significant note Ben mentioned, that in reality, the US administered over 4 million doses in a single day alone pretty recently. And so obviously, again, the J&J stuff might change this a little bit, but it's no secret that people across the globe are still, dying and getting very sick from the COVID-19 virus. And the simple reality is that the vaccine can save lives. And I think we'll again dive into this a little bit later, but I think the biggest thing to take away from the J&J news this morning, and obviously it's a developing story, but I think you can actually use it as a positive, right? For those who are skeptical about the vaccine, who are worried that it's not safe, or who are worried that it got rushed into production and into distribution, what you see now is the government is taking very seriously an instance of 6 out of almost 7 million individuals who received the vaccine getting sick from it, from blood clots or having that complication. 6 out of 7 million, and the federal government's pressing pause, right, and urging everyone to take a step back and see the impact. So it's obviously a very terrible thing, and it's something to keep an eye on, but I think you can actually use it as a messaging point to convey just how seriously the government is taking the safety aspect of it. Because if there's been complications from 6 out of 7 million and they're pressing pause, it's obviously something that they're keeping close watch on to ensure that people are able to take the vaccine safely.
You're right, and I think Sean and we can, happy to take any comments or questions in the chat or in video here. But I think it's like the commitment to safety, I think, becomes a key messaging point of it. So I think you're exactly right, Sean, that while it's not something that we wish for, it actually illustrates that even in a very low instance rate. So if you've had the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and it's 6 out of 7 million, that's a lot. There's a lot more things in life to worry about than that instance rate. However, the seriousness of which it's taken, I think, can be positive and give us more confidence overall. So I'll just pause there for a second, and if there's any comments or questions, I know Larry, you kind of started out with an interesting conversation you had, but I know this is going to be a big topic for all this, and it's my wish is that it doesn't impede the broader message we have to say, and it's not held up as something that is just a reason that people who are already predisposed say, look at that, I knew it. We've got to be able to combat that. Any comments or questions? Okay, let's move on then to the second messaging point, or the second objective, which is we need to inoculate people against misinformation. The difference is the issue is that information's coming all around, and it certainly seems like in recent years, misinformation of all types has increased. And so you start to hear things like, oh, does the vaccine alter your DNA? Is there something about a microchip going on here? Is it some kind of new technology that some of these vaccines on that were developed, last week? Like what is it about it? And a lot of these, so it's not enough that we message positively, we actually have to message counter to misinformation. And so, Sean, maybe you can take us through this a little bit about some of the key things about, just like that questions that people had, they heard it somewhere. I read this, my friend told me this, my grandma's concerned about that, and a sample of how to message against that.
Yeah, and these are just a few examples. Obviously, I'm sure everyone on this call can name plenty that they've heard in their own communities about, the vaccine and its efficacy and what it does and doesn't do. But some of the main ones, of course, are what the vaccine actually is. And of course, the vaccine does not contain any traces of the coronavirus. Making sure that people are educated to the fact that it only triggers an immune response in your body, obviously then helping your body defeat the virus. And then to Ben's point, it's not always enough to just say what it is. We also have to tell people what it isn't, right? So the vaccine has zero effect on your DNA, it does not contain a microchip, and it certainly doesn't have any other kind of harmful substances that are going to negatively impact your health or your body. So that's a little bit of an example of this. And I think, again, not to belabor the point, but obviously very timely, this becomes, even more important today with the J&J news, right? Because I'm sure you guys have all seen it before, and you all know, because this news came out, there's probably going to be an influx of misinformation talking about how everyone taking the J&J vaccine is getting sick or dying, or that it doesn't work, or that it's completely unsafe, right? So that's just a really timely example of how important it is to inoculate against misinformation and to continue inoculating against it as the days and weeks go by and more kind of falsities or false narratives come out.
Okay, absolutely. So first objective, the safety message. Second objective, kind of inoculating against misinformation. Third objective is that we've got to give some practical information here, right? We've got to supply logistical details, action steps. It's not just enough to hear about this. Like, what do you do? What do you do now? Where do you go? How do you tell someone else that is a friend or family member? Where do they go? And so an example here is maybe Sean, take us through this about like how we start talking about action steps and key messaging about this sort of, which we talked about at the beginning of this meeting about that, like kind of vaccine supply is far outpacing demand.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll see with all of these, they kind of follow a pattern, right? So again, it's one thing to educate and give people information, which, a very simple fact up top here, communities across Georgia have vaccine supply that is far outpacing demand. I know it was talked about earlier in the call at the outset about how, what Georgia continuously lags other states in terms of the doses that are being delivered and the doses being administered. But it's, of course, not just enough to tell people that, right? You have to kind of show them the way and give them the next step. And this is obviously a super broad example because all of your communities are going to differ a little bit, and you guys are going to have way more specific information you can share with your constituents about where they can go and how they can get their shot. But the point is you have to tell them that, right? You have to educate them. You have to tell them the 30,000 foot, but then you also have to tell them, here's how you do it, so that they, don't really have any excuses per se, and that they are armed with everything they need to go ahead and get vaccinated, down to the, the location, how to schedule the appointment, and all that good stuff that gets overlooked. But that's obviously super necessary to make sure that it's happening.
Well, and usually what I like to do too is, and I use this all the time when I was a regular on whether it was CNN or CNBC or Fox News. One of the things I'd always like to do is end those interviews with some type of action step, right? Something to do, because you would have heard a lot of information. Also know that, people are like, if I was on the radio, people be hearing me on the radio and, maybe they're driving in their car and they didn't have time to write something down. I want to be the last thing they remember. So usually that action step, certainly to work it in, but also at the kind of ending point is like the last thing that you remember is really, really powerful. And one thing to kind of, just a way to kind of understand this and kind of think about it, kind of want to understand human psychology is, I don't know how many of you have like, maybe not during the pandemic, but like been to like a Disneyland or a Disney World, and probably at some point, I don't know if you took your kids there and you were there and there was a bunch of stuff in Disneyland, like you had a really long line to get to the ride, right? You had like, you need to get to the bathroom. There's all these hassles, but then you come back and you don't remember any of those things. Why? Because these high points, these great moments, like Disney puts a lot of emphasis on how do you leave Disneyland to give you a positive experience. You remember those things. So the point I want to mention about these call to actions is, there can be lots of things you say, but when you say them, like at that ending point, really, really matters for retention. Brings us to the fourth point.
Can I jump in here really quickly? And thanks so much, Ben and Sean, for that call to action. One thing, members, is that when we've created this messaging and even these press release templates and social media posts, we've always ended those things with calls to action because they are so powerful. So definitely be thinking about those, when you're customizing these tools that we have for you.
Okay. Yeah, excellent. Great. Thank you for the point, Kelly. Fourth objective, and then we're going to finish this section and get into some like target groups. So fourth objective is build trust and confidence with key audiences. So the issue, and one of the points I like to make when I do a lot of messaging work, is that you've got to be believed to be heard, right? How many of you have been told something by someone that they just didn't have credibility, you didn't believe them, you didn't trust them? It doesn't matter how good their message was, right? You're probably like, I'm taking this with a grain of salt, right? So we've got to build trust and confidence with key audiences. That's one of our primary objectives. And so here's a sample that talks about, how we might talk about certain minority communities, communities of color, and additional trust building that needs to happen. And Sean, if you want to just kind of show the sample here, and I know in our materials online, we have a lot more on this too.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, as you can see, this one is specific to communities of color. It's not just for communities of color, right? Regardless of your audience and who you're talking to, you really have to build that trust so that people are confident that what you're saying is true and that what you're telling them or asking them to do is going to benefit them and be in their best interest. But this one in particular, obviously acknowledging, people's fears and what's happened in the past, understanding that historic mistreatment of communities of color can make you hesitant or even skeptical of the vaccine, and acknowledging again that you can understand how these horrible incidents, along with the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on communities of color over the past year, can bring you little hope, but then transitioning to convey to them that today's vaccine process is safe and effective and that you can trust this process. And there's a lot of ways you can do this beyond messaging, right? We'll talk about this later, and I'm sure, you've talked about it before amongst yourselves, but something as simple as being able to convey to them that you yourself have taken the vaccine is obviously tremendously powerful. Again, goes for all audiences and all constituencies, but really making sure that you aren't discounting people's fears and concerns, that you're acknowledging them, that you're talking about them, but that you're also conveying to them that this is different and that this is safe and effective is really important.
Right, and I think that kind of what Sean was alluding to about the kind of the show not tell. I mean, I think because all of you are leaders, and because all of you are leaders, you have access to like the statistics briefing that we had at the beginning, the great briefing that we had. So because you're leaders, people assume that you have more inside information. You know a little bit more what's going on. You know about what rollout's happening. And if you're embracing this and trusting this, and you have more information than the average citizen, that conveys a lot. That's powerful. So that's the fourth thing. So just to reiterate, and then we'll kind of move on to the next section, but we've got to do the safety. We've got to bridge the safety information gap. Safety is going to be really, really important to message. We've got to fight back against misinformation like rumors, or I heard this, or I thought this, or I read this. Third, we've got to actually drive to action steps, Kelly's point, and logistical details and action steps. And then fourth, we've got to build trust and confidence, because if we don't solve that, then no matter how great our message is, people aren't going to hear it. So now that we've done that, let's talk about 5 key COVID-19 vaccine audiences. So obviously, we'd love to convince everyone in the state of Georgia, if we could. But given that there's a lot of folks that we would need to convince, how can we target our message and focus on those that will make the most impact? And by the way, that's not just all people that are at high risk. That's some of it. But it's also people that are exactly the kind of people like maybe that 25 to 34 age group that has, that's like 10%, I think we saw in the stats earlier, in terms of getting the vaccine. Might we need to convince them too? So let me talk about 5 key audiences, and we'll give you some samples. So first audience to start with is obviously we need to save lives. So high risk individuals. How do we think about messaging for them? And those are who are at higher risk for catching COVID-19, including the elderly, those with pre-existing medical conditions. So how do we start tailoring our message to them? That's our first kind of probably the most obvious group, because we've got to save lives, and there could be fear around misinformation for some of those groups. Particularly, you can imagine if you've been someone that hasn't left your house in a year, and to do this vaccine, you've got to leave your house. There could be a lot of fear there. So we put together some things, and sort of Sean, take us through the strategy of this on specifically how this might differ for someone who is a high-risk individual versus a general population.
Sure. You'll see in the messaging documents that are housed on the website, there's a lot of talk about what's at stake, right? And conveying to people the alternative to not, getting their own vaccine, but obviously the community at large getting their vaccine and eventually establishing herd immunity, right? And so really important with this group to convey that in as clear as terms as possible. And that comes down to the dangers associated with refusing to receive the vaccine or waiting too long, especially given the situation on the ground in Georgia, where there is ample supply. People need to know that and understand that now is the time to get their vaccine, regardless of who they are, but certainly if they're a high-risk individual. And, you know, really talking in stark terms, right? Obviously, you don't want to scare people necessarily, but it's important to convey to them what the alternative is, right? Refusing to get the vaccine for yourself, and then, of course, the community at large, means that there's going to be more sickness and there's going to be more death. And again, really establishing the fact that there is no reason to wait in Georgia is super important, because I think you're always going to find, no matter what the situation is, that people are always probably going to say, you know, I'll do it tomorrow, or I'll do it next week, or it's not that important, right? So given where you guys are at and the ample supply of doses you do have, it really is the time now to message to your constituents and your communities to tell them that they have the opportunity to do this and there's no reason to wait.
Well, and I think that question of waiting for this group is key. I mean, we did focus group work as part of this initiative, as part of other initiatives we've done. And the issue is there is a certain even sentiment among a certain number of people that is like, yeah, I'm going to get it, but like, I'm gonna let a whole bunch of people take it first, right? Like let this go on for a long time. And the problem is, if too many people do that, then the herd immunity we need, and particularly to fight back against some of the variants that will happen, one of the best ways is to have the herd immunity before too many variants come in. That's really important. So I think that sort of saying like, don't delay, becomes important for that group. So that's the first target group, high-risk individuals. Second group that we've got to personalize our message is underserved communities. And those who could have less access to information and resources, that could be certain minority communities, that could be certain rural communities as well. How do we shift our messaging for those communities? And I think one of the key things is that having it to build trust with the communities, we talked about that a little bit, and having more easy to follow action steps. So it's not just information, you get lost in information, right, Sean? But also having kind of follow through of steps of what to do.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, this ties directly into Kelly's point as well, having that call to action, right? Because it's one thing to build trust, which is paramount. If you don't have that trust, it doesn't really matter, you know, what you tell them. You could, you know, literally take them to the vaccine site, roll up their sleeve for them, and you know, do everything you could to have them ready for it. But if they don't trust you, that's never going to happen, right? So building that trust is imperative. And then again, arming them with as much information as possible, and providing them with those concrete steps that are easy to follow to ensure that they will be vaccinated is of the utmost importance. So, you know, again, for all of these, it's not really one or the other, it's an all of the above. And so for this group in particular, one, important to assuage their concerns and fears. Two, important to, you know, educate them on the benefits of the vaccine and to dispel myths and misinformation. And three, really important to, you know, tell them in the clearest terms possible how and where to get their shot and what the process entails.
And I think the thing underlying here, and I think Kelly, you know, you talk a lot with our team about this too, is that it's like, it's not one size fits all in the messaging for everyone, right? Different groups have different concerns, and that's what we're doing here, and we're personalizing. So number three, we talked about high at risk, we talked about underserved communities. Now let's just talk about another group really important, because these are the people on the fence, right? These are the people who are, you know, a lot of you are elected officials. They're like our undecided voters, right? In this process, they're the vaccine hesitant, right? They're not necessarily like anti-vaccine, but they might be hesitant to take it now because they've heard something about safety. Maybe they saw a news report on this on the Johnson & Johnson. Maybe they heard something about speed of development. So they're on the fence, right? There's that citizen, that voter that we've got to pull over to our side, the vaccine hesitant. And so, Sean, we can talk about the strategy here, but we've got to actually look at really the misinformation side here, right? Like many things, as you said, we have to message, but specifically misinformation, because it's just hearing that anecdotal evidence. I think, unfortunately, on social media, there was I don't know if you guys have seen this, there was a photo around about someone who had like a kind of a bad skin issue on their legs after taking a vaccine. So that picture is worth a lot, and that just adds enough hesitation to someone's like, I was probably going to get it, but you know what? I'm just not going to get around to it now because it's just easier. So Sean, take us through that group, the vaccine hesitant, how that sort of shifts messaging, especially against misinformation.
Yeah, another group that's a prime example of nothing in the messaging is either or. It's kind of all of the above, right? You can't have one without the other. And so um, earning their trust, super important. And even if you have that trust already, um, there's other people in their lives they trust too, right? Particularly friends and family on social media who might be posting, memes like Ben just referenced, or horror stories, or even very real news stories like the CNN story on the J&J vaccine today, right? That's accurate. That's true. It all happened. But without the right context, it's easy to see why someone would see that and say, oh my gosh, I'm never getting this vaccine because it's going to give me blood clots or it's going to kill me, right? So really important to do the trust piece and the education piece. And you can't have one without the other, right? They can trust you and not be educated on it, so they're not going to take the vaccine, or they can be educated on it and not trust you, so they're not going to listen to you and go and get the vaccine. That doesn't work either, right? So definitely an all of the above approach, and something that's really important, as an all-encompassing messaging strategy.
Well, and actually, and one thing I'd really encourage you is that you don't have to convince people. Like, you don't have to go in like, I spoke to someone, or I was on this TV show or did this interview, and like convince them like, wasn't going to take the vaccine, heard you now, and like, I'm getting it, right? You don't have to do that. You could make someone, 12% more likely to listen to a vaccine message, and that's going to be a victory. Why is that a victory? Because there's other ways we can reach them. There's other parts of this campaign. There's other things going on in the state. So it's not all or nothing. It's like, you say something and man, they didn't listen. I didn't change their mind. It's all for naught. It's not. It's like, can you get them incrementally a little bit more interested in hearing someone else's message? And then suddenly their friend says they got it. And they're like, oh, whereas they wouldn't have listened to that friend before, now they will. And that's a victory. And that's how we get these kind of group cause-related messages to spread. You don't have to convince people. You just have to get people incrementally a little more predisposed. Group 4, skeptical spreaders. So this group, we have to think, they may not think they need a vaccine or don't plan to take it. Maybe it's young people. Maybe it's college students. How do we reach them, right? If we just go on with like a safety message, a health message, the issue is that they might not be concerned that much about their health or safety. That's not even their predominant issue. So we've got to shift the message if we're going to reach them, and 1, try to convince them, or 2, at least try to not have them be spreading, don't get the vaccine. That would be a victory as well. So Sean, take us through a little bit of the strategy here. And this is less about safety and more about like impact on our lives and a return to the things we love in normalcy.
Yeah, and I think, my sense is this is probably one of the hardest groups to message to, and a lot of these groups are difficult to message to for different reasons, and some are, quite honestly, probably more serious than others, right? If you have communities that are sincerely skeptical about the vaccine because of things that have happened in the past versus groups of college kids that don't want to get it because they think they're healthy and they don't need a shot. That's two very different things, but equally difficult in some respects. And this group in particular, I'm sure you guys have all heard of like FOMO, fear of missing out. I think that's really big with this group. I think if you try and hammer home the health and safety message, maybe it appeals to them if you're talking about, how important it is to make sure that their grandparents or elderly relatives or loved ones are safe. But maybe more than that, quite honestly, is conveying to them what another year of lack of vaccines, lack of achieving herd immunity, and lack of just overall, acceptance of the vaccine means for them. And that could mean, anything from quarantining again to not being able to go to bars, clubs, festivals, sporting events, to maybe not even going to in-person class, right? Missing out on the college experience. So really important with this group that, in addition to the health message, which is important, but probably not as important, that you're really hammering home, kind of what's at stake. And you hear me keep saying what's at stake, because I think that's really important for a lot of these groups. But maybe this one more than any other, because, that probably speaks to them and is really going to resonate with them in terms of what the vaccine means for them versus what not getting the vaccine means for them.
Absolutely. And fifth and final group, before we move on to what will be like actually a really, really fun section. Fifth and final group is pro-vaccine influencers. So we've spent a lot of time either being like trying to message to people who, are on the fence, are at high risk, have less access to information, maybe are predisposed against us. But this is like, in sort of election terms, this is like doubling down on your base, right? Like getting the people who are business advocates to like, not just like get the vaccine and keep this to yourself, but how can we get them to spread? How can they be influential to others? And I think here, and Sean or Jackson, feel free to jump in. The idea is, how can we get a person who's supportive, not just to do it, themselves, but to like put this on social media, tell their friends, be excited about it, celebrate it with a sticker, make this a bigger thing, because if enough people do that, then even a skeptical person, you get influence. Well, if all these people who I think are cool or interesting or respect are doing it, maybe I should rethink this. So Sean or Jackson, any other kind of notes here on sort of like turning people who are getting the vaccine into something more than that to help our messaging?
I mean, I think one of the most obvious things that you can do here is just ask, right? Just asking your community and on social media to, please share. If you've already gotten the vaccine, there's more you can do. Share this information, make sure that your network is aware of where vaccine sites are in your immediate community, and appealing to, there's something to be said for, if a sense of duty and a sense of love for your community has already driven you to take the first step of getting a vaccine, now take the next step of helping to educate others within your community. And in a lot of ways, it's almost easier to take someone who's already bought in and taken that first step to now take the next step of becoming an advocate. And I think if we fail to like just ask for that support, we're probably missing out on a massive opportunity.
Right, and you saw any kind of cause-related campaigns, like remember like the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge, and you saw people doing it, and part of that campaign was challenge 3 other people to do it. Imagine how we could multiply our efforts if we embrace this. So just to kind of
I promise this is the last time I'm going to jump in, but
please.
Speaks to kind of the power of the talking points that we've developed, that we work with Top Global to develop for you all. And so share those talking points with them, but also encourage them to, customize them, put their own spin on it, put their own swag on those talking points. Because what we have shared, what we've created are facts. Just let them, these influencers in your community, kind of shape them to their different audience and not recreate the wheel.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and I think one of the fun things that, as fun as it can be on the sort of horrible virus and disease, but I think one of the things when we think about influencer marketing is people talk about, going viral, right? And they don't mean the viral, they mean going viral. And so it's actually a viral race, right? This virus is spreading virally, but through influencers, we can spread virally our message too. And who's going to be faster, us or COVID? So I think there's like great power in that.
Absolutely.
Let's move on to understanding the 5 types of COVID vaccine message points. I love this because so many of you are leaders, and this is going to give you like, not only for COVID messaging, but also just like 5 elements in your toolkit of communication that you can use no matter what you need to communicate. So in my opinion, is like super powerful, but we've applied it to COVID here. So let me give you this kind of 5 types of messaging points framework. So this is a way to think about what are the 5 types in any message that you're doing and how to leverage all of them to be a more effective communicator. So the first message type, we're going to give you 5 of these, is the data point. This is one of the building blocks of messaging. So you can provide a fact, a statistic, or other noteworthy tidbit that informs or enlightens, right? And there's a lot of stats flowing around. How do you structure that? So here's an example of a data point as one of your 5 parts of your toolkit. So, more than 17,000 Georgians have died due to COVID-19. Out of the 2.5 million Georgians who have taken the vaccine, not a single one has died. COVID claims not lives, the vaccine saves them. So that's the example of using a data point juxtaposing 2 things, right? Which is the horrific cost in lives for our state, but then juxtaposed with the number of people who have the vaccine who obviously we've saved lives. So that's the example of data point. That's point number 1. And what I want to show you is 5 different ways to do this, and then how you can combine them in different patterns to become more effective. So let's say you lead with a data point. But then here's another example of second building block of communication, analysis. So in this, we're not just going to give data, we're going to interpret the facts and explain the why behind the story or news. So we did data the first time. In this case, we might say, well, here's an analysis. Georgia ranks near the bottom in the US right now for percentages of vaccines that have been administered relative to doses. And if Georgia's vaccine allotment continues to go unused, this is going to prolong our personal and economic suffering. So you're analyzing something, right? The data is maybe what's our sort of vaccine adoption rate. But the analysis and what this means, now you're explaining that, okay? So we've seen a data point, we've seen an analysis. But like one of the most memorable things is not to hit people over the head with numbers. How can you add memorability? Well, here's the third building block, an anecdote. So this is provide a story that brings a particular point to life in an interesting or memorable way. So, there's been some of our political leaders, some of our presidents have been great at this, right? Like, how do you tell a story that's more resonant than any piece of data you could give? So here's an example of this, of like how you might tell a story. Here's an anecdote. Like, you talk about experience. Like, I want to go to a local diner or coffee shop without worrying. I want to go to concerts and festivals without thinking twice. What I really want to do is I want to hug my grandparents, my parents, without even the smallest hint of fear. And taking the vaccine is the fastest path to get our lives back. So this is like a personal story, and your personal situation, you may have different things. Maybe you're not a diner or coffee shop goer, you're something else. But it's like, how do we tie in those stories to get this point? Like, this would be the message point about like getting back to normalcy. But you don't have to say, you don't have to give the stat on that. Instead, you reveal this story. So the point I want to make is we might, maybe if you're in media and you're doing something, you might like lead with this anecdote and then hit them with a data point. Or maybe you're doing this other messaging to constituents and you hit them with the data point, then you go to the anecdote. So you can use these in different ways to reinforce your message. The way human memory works is that the more of these devices we use in combination, you have a greater chance for recall and retention, because we're a combination of visual, auditory, and kinetic learners. We all process information differently. So varying your approach tends to get more resonance. So that's number 3. Number 4 in our toolkit is a prediction. How can we extrapolate on past news, trends, data to project what will happen in the future? And here's an example of how we take something and project it forward. So here's a prediction. If we can raise our percentage of vaccine doses administered in Georgia from one of the lowest states to one of the highest, we'd have more than 2 million more doses administered right now. And that alone could shorten our path back to normalcy by 3 to 6 months. So here's an example of a prediction where essentially what we did to do this was we just took like, what's the rate in Georgia and what's the rate in the highest sort of state for this, which I believe is New Hampshire, at least last report I saw, and said, okay, if Georgia had that rate, what would that be? But more than that, what's the prediction for what this would happen? So this is sort of saying and messaging, like this would be a great thing to message to some of those skeptical spreaders, those audiences don't think they need it. Like, man, if we could get this over with 3 to 6 months earlier, wouldn't that be better? Of course. So that's an example of a prediction. And finally, number 5 is an action step. So we've heard a data point, we've done an analysis, we've done an anecdote, we could make a prediction. Our 5th building block is an action step. How do we provide actionable tips or suggestions on what people can do next or in a specified time frame? So here's an example of like, hey, the Georgia Department of Health has created a Georgia mass vaccination site registration. You need to get pre-registered now. But after that, there's one more thing you need to do. This is the point with Kelly. You need to tell your friends you did it. You need to post it on social media. You need to shout it from the rooftops. To get immunity, let's be a community. So this is all about action steps. So what I would love to see folks do when they message us is like, maybe you've got a real analytical audience. Okay, we got data point, then let's hit with the action step. Maybe your audience doesn't care about all those like numbers and stats. Like, let's do an anecdote about getting back to normalcy. Then let's hit them with an action step. Then maybe for this other audience, like, they're just like, they want to understand the why. Let's analyze action step, or analyze anecdote action step. Or let's create some news by making a prediction, but still get back to the action step, right? So you can use these as combinations. And what I find is by taking it to the building blocks, it gives you all kinds of ideas on how to message. You can reach more people. You reach those people who are, the kind of people who like learn things by studying in books. You reach kind of people who learn things just by listening. You can reach all those people better. So I'll just pause there. Any comments or questions on that, either from, of course, Larry or Kelly, or also, Jackson and Sean, on how these building blocks are tools that allow us to communicate better? Jackson or Sean? Otherwise, I'll keep going. And just to review, data point is your first in your toolkit. Analysis is the second. Anecdote is third. Prediction is fourth. And action step is fifth. Any other? It looks like Jackson, you have a comment.
No, just coming back on video.
Okay, good. Okay, so we know our objectives, we know our target audience's messages. We've talked about 5 aspects of our toolkit. Now, how can we communicate our message better, right? What can we do to make this more resonant, more sticky, more wanting to spread? And I want to kind of throw this out there, and feel free to comment in the chat. I mean, just think of like what you share on social media. What do you tell your friends? What makes an idea easy to spread? And I don't want to put anyone on the spot here, but I don't know. I guess I can do it to Kelly, Larry. Anything that you want to spread? Jackson, what do you want to spread? Anyone else? Like, what's something that you just want to tell the world about? What is the quality of it? Just throw something out.
How amazing GMA is and Georgia cities are, and how much we love them. That's what I want to spread.
Say that again.
That's what I want to spread. How amazing Georgia cities are.
Okay, so you want to spread stuff you're passionate about, something
Absolutely.
like that, right? If you're passionate and it's something that is relevant to you, want to spread it. Anyone else, like what's something else that you just like, if you hear something, you're the first person like spreading it or sharing it on social or stuff like that. What else? What things do you like to spread? Yeah, Jackson, what things do you like to spread?
Well, I think in general, kind of across all of the work that we do, what is really.
Well, give me one thing. Like, do you spread, like, are you spreading cat videos, dog videos, Jackson? Are you spreading like what are you spreading? Like what are you?
I'll tell you, I love a good meme. I love a good meme across the
funny meme. Okay, that's another thing. Well, so let me say, looking at that, I would say that no matter what we come up with, it falls in 3 categories of things that we're going to spread. The first attribute of something we want to spread is it's got to be simple. It's got to be simple. What I mean by that is it has to be like, if it may be a brilliant idea on how to message COVID, but if it like takes you 20 minutes to explain it, it's that complex, it just won't spread fast. Why? Because it takes you 20 minutes to explain it. So even though Kelly, if you may have a great explanation of why you should message COVID, if Jackson hears it and it took you 20 minutes to explain it, then next time Jackson's got to repeat it, it's going to take 25 minutes, right? It's going to be slow. So we've got to simplify things. That's the first thing we have to do to make an idea easy to spread. Here's the second thing. It's got to be surprising. It's got to break our expectation in some way. So Jackson, when you saw the funny meme, it's like, oh, that was a kind of funny way to look at it. That's kind of clever, right? Maybe if you want to spread this, maybe it's like, Kelly, you heard something about, the cities you love in Georgia, and you heard like some stat about one of the cities that like blew your mind. You're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know this. I've been in the city a million times and I didn't know how cool this is. It surprised you. That's the second element. Third element is that it's significant. It says something deeper and more important, right? Let me give you an example, if you'll bear with me, of something that's simple and surprising but not significant. Are you ready? Blah! That was simple. I went blah. That was surprising. You didn't expect in your training that I'd go blah. Significant? No, I didn't say anything. So what I want to talk about is, as you message COVID vaccine information, being simple, surprising, and significant helps your ideas spread further. And by the way, this is great advice and messaging for talking to constituents, your next campaign. Simple, surprising, significant, you're going to spread your message more. Let me give you a couple examples of applying this to COVID about how this works. So some of you, first example, may have heard lots of questions. It's in our FAQs as part of the campaign about what's this like kind of other type of vaccines. They were developed kind of differently. They were mRNA technology, right? So mRNA, what is it? Do we trust it? Is it safe? So let me show you about this statement, why this statement has an ability to get shared or spread or be stickier. In the statement, mRNA technology has been in development for 30 years. So why is that a statement? And we're trying to communicate the safety of mRNA that is stickier than something else. If we just said like mRNA is safe. And if you're wondering what that is, that's the technology that's the basis both of the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine. So is it a simple idea? Well, yeah, you're saying 30 years, longer equals safer. It's been around, very easy to understand. Is it surprising? Well, yeah, because I thought this was like newfangled technology that someone said I can't trust. Well, it wasn't invented yesterday. That is surprising. Is it significant? Yes, it's empowering our vaccines. We can have more trust in them. This is like a great technological development, 30 years in the making, that meets the moment when we exactly need it most to help us solve COVID. So does that make sense? Simple, surprising, significant is a great framework for you to evaluate messages and what you're saying to make them more effective. Let me give you a different example, because you might be looking at that saying, well, okay, Ben, your messaging longer equals safer. Can we do it the opposite way in this framework? Here's an example of that. So this statement, maybe it's that the speed of vaccine development has made it more safe, right? So let's look at that as, why is that a resonant, sticky message? Well, it's simple. It's the opposite, actually. Is it faster equals safer? But is it surprising? Yes, because speed doesn't mean cutting corners. What it means is that we all had to join forces to get rid of the bureaucratic red tape and really focus on this. We gave it all of our attention because it was so important. So its speed is actually indicative of improving safety, because we all had to come together and really focus on it. Is it significant? Absolutely. We're saying more real world tests in less time we were able to achieve. So I just want to show you that framework. And what I want to say is that, in a lot of this, we're giving you the building blocks of how we should message this. What's the strategy? But trying to simplify that in your own voice as a leader, trying to make it a bit more surprising to get people's attention. Well, it's been around 30 years and we're worried about, whether RNA is like a newfangled technology from last week. Is it significant? Can we ladder it into our safety message? Can we ladder it into these message about the misinformation gap? Can we ladder it into building trust and giving action steps? This is a powerful framework. So if you're just, your staff helped you write a tweet or do an op-ed or use some of the great templates for a PSA, you customize it and you're like, is it done? Then all you do is you put on a page 3 checkboxes. Simple, surprising, significant. You go through and you look at it, and that's how you can evaluate if your message is effective. I'll just pause there. You can tell I get a little bit passionate about this kind of topic because I love spreading messages. Any other comments or questions before I keep going? Jackson or Sean, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that, for sort of significance, that will vary a little bit based on your audience. And I'd consider who you're targeting with each message that you put out, right? Depending on who you're talking to, what qualifies as significant and potentially even surprising will vary somewhat. But I think if you're able to really put yourself in the position of your audience, it becomes a lot easier to evaluate this. And remembering, of course, that, sort of sitting in the position of thinking about this messaging all day long means that what qualifies as simple, surprising, and significant for you may not be the same for your audience. So I think practicing some empathy there is potentially very helpful.
Absolutely. So we're getting into some of the key sort of tactical things you can do now to make you more effective. One of the things I want to give you as we sort of wrap up, and Kelly, I'm watching the time too, so we're going to finish on time. But how do we increase clarity and quotability? So how can we build an organized thought flow into your speech patterns that make your COVID-19 vaccine points easier to track and comprehend? So this is a great skill for any kind of city leader, which is like, if you're going to talk about this, how does what you say get like quoted in the local paper? It's what people share on social. How can you influence that? Let me give you some techniques for that. So first technique I call the counter. And this is, again, to increase clarity and quotability. By structuring things and how you talk about things in numerical order, it gives people a roadmap of what to expect next. So if you say, here's an example, there are 3 main reasons we can feel confident that the vaccine is safe. Number 1, number 2, number 3. The counter is a device that increases quotability because it gives people a roadmap. Like, oh, I can listen. This city council woman is explaining to me, and I can see 3 things coming. This mayor is saying this. I know what to expect. So the counter is really powerful. Here's another example. The Mythbuster. So we retain a lot more information if it's structured in terms of exploding a myth we assume. So here's an example. Some people think the vaccine is only important for the elderly, but the truth is actually. So that structure aids in our retention, aids in our quotability. It's what journalists look for. Sean, I don't know if there's anything you want to add on sort of Mythbuster and sort of these constructs to give people tools to be quoted more and be more clear. Oh, Sean, you might be on mute. Did we lose you there? Okay, well then, Jackson, thoughts on the Mythbuster?
I think one of the great things about the Mythbuster is it gives us the ability to directly confront misinformation. But also when this is sort of a belief or a notion that's held uncritically by our audience, when we're using the Mythbuster format, we're inherently surprising because we're challenging something that they thought to be sort of true already. I think the flip side of that is that we need to make sure that we're approaching this in a manner with our messaging that is sort of informative and helpful, and in no way perceived as, for example, threatening or combative towards a view that might be sort of dearly held. We need to be making sure that we're aligning ourselves on the same side of the issue as our audience, even as we're bringing them into a position where they're challenging maybe myths that they've internalized.
So just to reiterate, you could say there's 3 reasons why. Or another construct is some people think A, but the truth is actually B. Here's a third element of your toolkit, the shocker. This is great in communication to get people to pay attention, because what this is sort of the preamble to say, pay attention of what I'm going to say. So did you know that the COVID-19 vaccine is, right? Did you know that 7 million people have already taken the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and the issues of blood clot was limited to 6 people, right? Can you believe that vaccine availability is now widely, we have too much supply and not enough demand. We've got to, come on, folks, we've got to come together as a community to get that herd immunity we need. So the shocker is a form of speech that says, what I'm about to say is really gonna shock you, listen up, and that's a great way to get more attention as a leader for that point you have coming. Fourth is the kicker. So the kicker is setting up and literally telling people, this is what you need to remember. So the key point about the vaccine that everyone misses is that it's more effective if we all take it. It all helps us benefit if we come together. I'm just making up the point. That's one point. Or if there's one vaccine takeaway to remember, it is this: the faster we get more people to take the vaccine, the faster we get back to hugging our parents, our grandparents, our kids without even the smallest hint of worry. That's the kicker. Okay, so I'll just pause there, and any questions about the counter, the Mythbuster, the shocker, the kicker. As city leaders, I think if you start learning to work this into your speech, you can dramatically, I've seen people triple the amount of times they're quoted in a publication by just following these kind of techniques. Any other comments or questions, either from our team or the Georgia Municipal team or others, before we move on to the final section?
Any question, members? Any questions?
Larry, do you ever, you're a great communicator. Do you ever use the Mythbuster, the counter, or the shocker, or the kicker when you talk? Do you tend to like number things or list things out?
I absolutely do. I think I use all of them, some perhaps by accident, but those are great points. And we do have to think in how people receive things and how we speak to overcome, perception. So these are great examples and great education to make us all better in communicating. Okay,
cool. Well, fantastic. Let me get to the final section, and then we can wrap up and put any other questions into the chat. And by the way, if you have follow-up questions on this or want some help looking at something that you're doing, then I put my email in the chat, ben.kaplan@topagency.com. And my phone number is even in there, so you can even text or call. I'm available. Let me talk about the final section, which is leveraging key communication channels. We can reach a greater audience by maximizing the strength of each communication channel. I just want to give you a little bit of this because a lot of you may have an opportunity to use some of these channels. So mass media, what is the strength and how is mass media oriented, right? Your TV, your radio, your newspapers. Well, leverage mass media, it's about packaging information with a great headline and a way for media outlets to easily use it. So we spend a lot of time as an agency, and like if you're like talking about mass media in your city, giving them a story that you could summarize in a headline. Really, really important for mass media. Second, social media. So social media works better by thinking visually and combining personal stories with data points or action steps to achieve greater reach. We've done some of that, and I know like Kelly talked about, real proud of the social media toolkit that we have, and that's customizable. So you don't have to use, a photo of someone in some part of the state that has nothing to do with your city, right? You customize it to yourself for something that will resonate. But that's thinking visually and combining anything you can do, personal stories works better on social media. We see that all the time, by the way, and just as leaders, if you make a post personal, we'll see 4x more engagement on a personal related post rather than something generic. Third, influencer marketing. So if you're using influencers, using a combination of different tiers of macro, micro, and nano influencers to extend your audience reach. So influencer marketing is maybe too formal a phrase, but it's just like, who are the people you know in your network, in your team, in your constituency? And how do we get different levels of people helping to extend your audience reach? And finally, digital marketing. So one size doesn't fit all. It's some of the targeting tips we gave about how do you micro-target and retarget each audience with specific messages that will activate key emotions. So we're going to get into the specifics of the mediums, but I just want to kind of give you a sense of how it's different between mass media. It's all about packaging the soundbite. Social media, it's making it personal and think visually. Influencer, it's about engaging more different types of people. Digital marketing, it's about micro-targeting your message. And you can use all of that to communicate more effectively. So let me give you some practical tips. And finally, community organizations. Provide materials in a format, whether that's newsletters, email, blast, push notifications, that each organization already uses to communicate with their members. So what we have found over and over again is if you're interfacing with a partner organization or a community group, you don't try to make them, here's something in a format that we never use. That doesn't work. As you know, when we developed the templates, Kelly, we tried to create formats that people would reuse, because the best thing you can do with community organizations is give them something in a format like, we do our newsletter email blast. Okay, give them a newsletter email blast that looks exactly like what they have, and they're much more likely to use it. Okay, so to wrap up, some quick strategies for different media types. So TV, you have a chance to do TV. Typical format, 2 to 4 minutes for live interviews, 30 seconds for edited and taped segments. What we always do is like TV is about a series of sound bites. So it's like, how do you have your points that is real short, sequenced in order? Because average TV appearance, 2 minutes or less. If you're quoted on the local evening news, sometimes it's like a sentence. So you have to start talking shorter and more sound bites. And quick other thing is like, number one thing for TV is avoid rambling answers, especially on tough questions. If you get somebody and you're asked like, well, what do you think about Johnson & Johnson vaccine and this and that? It's like, keep it short. And if you don't have a great answer, get in and get out of it. What happens is people use up all their time kind of rambling because they don't know what to say. So that's key for TV. For radio, typical format, 5 to 10 minutes for live interviews and 20 to 30 minutes for shows in which you take caller questions. For radio, one of the great things you can do is prepare an anecdote that exemplifies each point. For radio, you've got more time. So if you want to say like, just the other day, I was speaking with, my cousin, my aunt, my uncle, my grandparents about this, and they told me one thing, and I realized like, oh man, there's hundreds of thousands of other people just like them in Georgia that we need to get this information out because they had some misinformation, and here's what they said, and here's what we told, right? Anecdotes for radio work really, really well, and actually creating more interaction by asking the host of the show questions about their own experience, right, is great for radio. So it's like, this is my experience. I was talking to my grandpa about this. What about your older family members in your thing? What are you talking about now? How are you doing? Interactivity in radio works really, really well. So that's kind of your radio 2 key tips. Print and online. So typical format can vary whether you're the focus of the story or you're just being quoted as maybe an expert or a leader. Couple quick tips here. The number one thing you can do to get quoted is to make it easy for the reporter to take good notes. So if you've got to really hit a call to action home about where to go to get pre-registered for the vaccine, you want to say that a couple times. You might want to say that slowly. If it's a website, you might want to spell that out for them. So structuring and highlighting information for reporters, making it easy, is a great technique for this. Or here's a little like pro tip for being quoted. Slow down your spoken cadence when you want to be quoted. So if I'm talking to you, I kind of talk fast naturally, and I'm giving you all these points about safety and all these points about misinformation and all these points about trust. And suddenly I say, the key is that you've got to show other people that you took the vaccine. The key is that you've got to show other people that you've took the vaccine. What I did there is I slowed down. I gave it more emphasis. This is like to a reporter highlighting in bright yellow, you should quote me on this, right? So your spoken cadence and how you slow down can facilitate more quotes. This works great for vaccine messaging. This works great for other messages you have to communicate to your constituents. And finally, strategies for social media. So typical format can vary based on whether the social network is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube. But let me talk about some of the key things you can do, and you can use our templates to help you do this. So first thing is think visually to achieve higher engagement. So the visual alone is not sufficient for the message, but that's the part that gets people to stop, pay attention, say, oh, I ought to look at this a little more closely. So anything you can do to do something, and particularly for your social media audience, the photos and pictures that tend to do well are ones that relate to you because they know you. So anything you can do with that, with a great photo, really what matters on social media. And secondly, make it timely to drive more social sharing. So anything you can do to give a time sensitivity. You said like, hey, I was just at the local vaccine center and I saw that like there used to be a line there. Line's not there anymore. This is a great time. If you're not pre-registered, you got to do it because we got to get more people in there. Like anything that has a time deadline, time sensitivity works great on social. Anything you can say that gives a reason to not put it off and do it now. So that's incredibly powerful. And finally, strategies for influencer marketing. So whether that's blogging or social platforms or just influencers spread things by word of mouth in the community, here's some key strategies for that. So utilize groups of influencers instead of individuals. So instead of being like, oh, that we got, boy, that one person in our town has, they're spreading the gossip for the whole town person. Let's get that person. I mean, yes, but there's different community groups. How do you put them together in groups to get your message spread? And then also with influencers, if you're getting other people, and influencers could be partner organizations, community organizations, churches. The idea is provide your guidelines, but let them find their own voice. One of the great ways that influencers can spread messages is that they know their audience, right? If this is a church leader, they know the types of things that are going to resonate. So you try to give them guidelines, but you also try to let them express it in the way that's natural to them, because usually they know their audience better than you know their audience. So I'm just going to pause there. Kelly and Larry, how are we doing on time? We're trying to get it right on that half hour, but I'm happy to answer any questions. I am just so excited to have the opportunity to sort of give you some hopefully some tools and tips and advice. And I just think you guys are doing an incredible job, and we're so lucky to have you looking out for all the folks in the state. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but just want to wrap up with that. And maybe I'd wrap up with one more thought of the day, just the final thought, my call to action. But any other questions or thoughts or comments, Kelly and Larry, before we conclude?
Well, I see no others in the chat box. Ben, thank you. Jackson, thank you for your expertise and for this information. It's extremely helpful. If you have a closing point to make, and then I'll call on Kelly, and we want to allow our president, Mayor Vince Williams, to dismiss us. Okay,
this is very good, and I want to let don't stand in the way of the mayor. So I'll make this fast. I just want to say, the final wrap up, what did we cover today? We talked about how some of the key objectives with safety, some of the key objectives with misinformation, and how we've got to keep those objectives in mind. We've talked about how we've got groups who are skeptical and groups that are in high need. We've got to message them differently in different ways. We've talked about how we can actually adjust our toolkit, whether we have a data point or an anecdote or an analysis or a prediction or a call to action, an action step. We've talked about how can we make our messages more simple and surprising and significant? And if we want this to spread, how do we use that as a framework? We've talked about, well, what can we do, whether it's like, you know, the counter, like there's 3 ways, the kicker to get people to listen to us. And we've talked about some strategies for different media types. The point I want to make is this, the final point, which is that we all individually don't have to solve this COVID-19 messaging issue, but just the power in this meeting to spread the word, to influence others. And many of you may be already doing a lot, but if we just kick that up, like each of us, 5%, 6%, 7%, the collective power in this group to spread that message incrementally could then influence so many other people in our towns and our cities to do the same. And that's an incredible effect we have. So whatever you're doing, thank you so much for all that you're doing. And if you can just increment this a little more, use the tools, listen to what Kelly and Larry say, give them feedback so we can help make it better. If we all incrementally do a little bit more, I think we can like kind of change some of those statistics, some of those numbers. I think we have a great future ahead.
Thank you, Ben. Kelly, from you before we call on President Williams.
Absolutely, and I'll be brief. I want to thank everyone for hanging on in there. I do know that some people had to drop off at 12. The great news is that we will be sending out this recording to members, but more importantly, we do have access to Ben and his expert team if we need some one-on-one training. So if you want to go a little deeper into some of the points we talked about today, please reach out to us at gacities@gacities.com. We will facilitate that. If nothing else, Ben, he encouraged you all to keep listening to Larry and Kelly, and I cannot, I can't debate that. So let's go.
You're like, that was the key point.
Hey, thank you, Kelly, for all your great work on this as well. And now our esteemed president, Mayor Vince Williams, with some comments to dismiss us.
Look, just a few comments. I do want to thank Ben, Sean, and certainly Jackson for sharing with us on today. One of the key takeaways for all of us is inoculate against bad information. You can quote me on that. But certainly GMA, we know that GMA is our weapon of choice, or shall I say GMA is our vaccine against arresting misinformation. To Larry, Kelly, and Rushi, or our own Dr. Patel and the entire team of caring professionals here at GMA, thank you for what you do each and every day in making sure that we as leaders are equipped and armed with accurate information to take back to all of the people who depend on us. So certainly, you know, you all know to get to immunity, let's be a community. I love y'all. There ain't nothing you can do about it. Thanks, everyone. Take care. This has been great.